Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Francis Tapon. In this episode, I have somebody who sounds like, well, somebody you know. His name is Dan Grec, and he went to Africa. He wanted to spend 2 years there, ended up spending 3 years there. He drove all around. He had his own Jeep. He went to 35 of the 54 African countries. This is a fun guy for me to talk to. We share a lot in common. We had a lot of great discussion, talked for about an hour and a half. He's got a Kickstarter campaign that's got about 180 backers at this point. He's got a week to finish it. So go out there and support him. This podcast was sponsored by my patrons at patreon.com/ftapon. And I want to give a special shout out to Kathy Edgar Kennedy and her support for Health Access Sumbawa, another organization you should support. So enjoy this fantastic episode with Dan Grec from theroadchoseme.com. Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Francis Tapon. In this episode, I have Dan Grec, who is an Australian who has traveled overland through Africa, through how many countries in Africa?
I traveled through 35 countries.
35 countries in Africa. You did it over 3 years?
That's right, yep.
You were probably planning to do 2 years and then it got extended.
That's exactly right.
In fact, it wasn't 3 years. It was 999 days. Dan, you and I got to talk.
Yeah, I know. My marketing agent's not very happy about that.
I'm very pissed off at you right now. One fucking more day, dude.
I know.
You
I
could
should
have
have delayed my plane ticket or something.
Did you not know at the time that it was 999?
No, I had no idea. It was a real scramble to finish the trip, get the Jeep in a shipping container, and so it shipped out, and I went back to the hotel and tried to book a plane ticket, booked it, and then had one more day in Egypt. So kind of wandered around, grabbed a coffee, whatever. And then I looked up the dates of when I'd gotten into Morocco and when I was flying out, and it was 999.
Oh, God. Okay, so I got to teach you a trick that we do in Africa, which I'm sure you've done. Maybe you haven't done. Maybe you're an honest person. You look like an honest person, unlike me, a criminal. You go into the passport, and then you scratch out and change the date.
Right.
That's all you got to do.
I met a few people doing this kind of thing, and it never really ended well for them.
Hey, it ended well for me.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Although one time I did get deported from Chad because I did that. Okay, so that may not always end good for
buyer beware.
But okay, so 999 days, but between you and my listeners, we're just going to say 1,000.
Okay, we'll go with that.
This was part 2 of I don't know how many part journey that you're going to be going on. I imagine this is not going to be your last journey.
That's right.
So give people a background, Dan. You were born in Australia and then you moved to another former colony of the United Kingdom.
That's right. I moved to Canada, Francis. I wanted to go snowboarding. I wanted to go hiking, camping, all the good stuff in the mountains. And I loved it. It was amazing. But I was working as an engineer, sitting at a desk, and it just wasn't making me happy. I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life until I turned 65. And so I started dreaming, what else can I do? What else is out there? And I had a little Jeep Wrangler at the time. And so I quit my job. I threw everything in my Jeep and I drove up to the top of Alaska, right up to the Arctic Ocean and, went hiking, camping.
Stop for 1 second. That Jeep Wrangler, how many miles had it had on it or kilometers before you set off?
That little Jeep, I bought it used and it had 70,000 miles on it when I bought it.
That's not the same one that you took to Africa.
No, different Jeep.
Got it. Okay, yep. Continue.
Yep, so little Jeep, drove it all the way up to Alaska, had a phenomenal time for the summer, saw bears and glaciers and all that kind of good stuff. And then I turned around and wanted to keep adventuring, so I started driving south and I ended up driving all the way to Argentina, so all the way through Central and South America. And as you can imagine, the adventure was unbelievable. I poked lava with a stick. I went scuba diving. I climbed a volcano.
What happened to the stick?
The stick, it vaporizes as soon as it touches the lava.
Really?
So as fast as you can push it in, it's just there's nothing left anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you didn't try your finger?
I did not, no, but my
you
boots...
pussy!
My boots
you fucking pussy!
My boots were melting and sticking to the rocks a little bit, so it was getting a bit real.
I suppose. All right. Maybe you're a tough guy in the end.
Yeah.
Okay. So your trip to Argentina, it wasn't actually planned. In other words, it wasn't that was your objective when the moment you set foot?
No, that's right. I just wanted to like have an adventure, whether it was going to be 2 months or 6. And I just figured I'll keep going as long as I'm having fun. But the whole point was, if I don't feel safe or I'm not having fun or I run out of money, I'll give up and I'll do something else. And that was fine.
Got it. And then why Canada versus, let's say, New Zealand? Because New Zealand has plenty of nice mountains as well.
I don't have a good answer for that. I guess Canada's bigger, maybe. I don't know.
A little bit bigger, just a tad.
More exotic, I guess. I was ready to leave.
For you, it's exotic. Of course, for us Americans, it's like...
Yeah, in Australia, we grow up stuck on this island, really far away from the world. So I think we get to a certain point where we're like, I just want to go and see what else is out there, go have adventures far, far away.
In all my world travelers, I'm always astounded whenever I meet an Australian because it's almost impossible to find an Australian who's traveling for less than 6 months.
Yeah, I think it costs so much for us to leave our island and it takes so long. It's a massive plane flight. And so once you've finally left, it kind of just makes sense to stay, adventuring. It's easier to keep
maybe Australia just sucks. Maybe that's it. I mean, maybe it's just a shitty place.
Well, I'm not in a hurry to go back, to be honest with you. I mean,
see what I mean? There you go.
It's nice. It just isn't very exciting for me. It just kind of is like all the same. There isn't really a lot of culture. There's no language. There's no, kind of challenges like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So interesting. So then but I want to go off and talk much more about the Africa trip because I'm fascinated by that.
Yep.
You did this Argentina trip. And what year was that? Sorry?
That was from 2009 to 2011.
Got it. So for about 2-3 years,
2 years,
you were going through Central and South America.
Yep.
And you got back to, at that point, Australia. You hadn't been in Canada at that point.
No, I went back to Canada.
Okay. And then from there you said, that was a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
That's exactly what I said. And then, first step is saving money. So I had to go back to work. So I actually went back to a desk job and, worked for years and years to save up the money.
What desk job do you do? Is it cocaine?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a computer programmer, actually.
Almost the same thing.
Yeah, nearly. Really. So I worked for the telephone company, which is kind of like selling your soul. But that worked effectively. It put money in my bank account, which was the goal.
And so, wait, and how did you get a permit to work in Canada if you're an Australian?
Yeah, they make it really easy between the former British colonies, as you mentioned. And I've been here so long now that I'm a resident. So actually, Canada's my home.
Wow. And it wasn't that complicated to just pick up and move?
Oh, no. It took about 5 years of paperwork. It was a lot of work.
So a lot of times I like to talk about the logistics of actually traveling because for a lot of people that listen to you and me, they were talking about these crazy long travels. It looks unreachable, untenable. It's just out of their financial reach. And I try to teach people how to actually do it. And so why don't you tell us about, for example, what did you do as far as living expenses? Like you're earning a salary and then behind your desk job, but where were you living and how were you living?
Yeah, I rented a room in a basement suite, so I was sharing with someone else. And so it was pretty cheap. I mean, it wasn't the fanciest.
You weren't sharing the actual room itself.
No, sorry, sharing like the little, 2-bedroom apartment.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it was cheap. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked.
How much did the rent cost in this basement apartment?
I was paying 500 Canadian a month. So that's only like 400 US a month.
Wow. Okay, great. And you had no view because you're in the basement.
Exactly. And the winter was really long because I was in the basement.
So you went to Canada for the views of the mountains and you ended up in a basement.
That's right. Exactly. Pretty smart guy all around.
You're a very clever man. So then you worked for how long?
I worked for 4 years at that job.
Okay. Got it. And then for 4 years, you're socking away the money.
That's right.
What would you do? Would you just put it in a bank or did you invest in stocks or any other kind of investment vehicle? Or what did you do?
I just had a savings account and I set up an automatic transfer online. So every 2 weeks on payday, a certain amount of money would just disappear from my regular account and go straight into this savings account.
What percentage of your income were you saving? Approximately.
Approximately.
A quarter, a half?
I'd say a quarter, maybe 30%.
Okay, not as much as you probably could have saved. I don't know. It depends on how much income you were making and your expenses. But Sometimes I talk to travelers and they're easily able to save more than half of
Yeah.
their income.
Yeah. And I was struggling to find the balance between still doing adventures where I was living, getting out on the weekends, but trying to save money. So yeah, I tried hard to still enjoy myself while saving money.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't sacrifice everything you just sacrificed your view.
And I feel like what I did sacrifice, Francis, is the easy stuff that doesn't bother me. So, for example, I cooked all of my own food, so I would just never buy at a restaurant. I love coffee, but I just put a rule on myself. I have to make it myself. I'm not allowed to buy it from a cafe because it's too expensive. Little things like that. I rode my bike to work, even in the winter, just to save money.
Did you not have a car?
I did actually have like a $400 Subaru that I would get around in on the weekends. But to save money, it just made sense to ride my bike to work.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how long was your commute?
Oh, it was about 20 minutes on the bike.
Okay. Yeah.
Not
and
bad.
but it's hardcore in the winter. Sorry, what part of Canada was this? What city? Or
I was actually in the Yukon, so right up next to Alaska.
Holy fuck. That's cold as shit.
It was minus 44 a couple of mornings when I was riding to work.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn. So like, are you prepared for like overland, walking across the Antarctica? Is that what you're training for here? On a bicycle, maybe?
If you're going to live up there, you may as well kind of enjoy the winter. Like otherwise you're just sort of miserable.
So I imagine that you're sitting in your basement, Dan, and then you're next to, do you have like a space heater or is it like a gas?
I had a wood stove actually.
So I imagine if you're like more than a couple of meters away from the wood stove, it's fucking cold.
No. Once the wood stove's been running for a good 24 hours, you can get it like toasty warm inside, even when it's minus 40 outside.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Great. It's kind of like a snow cave.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And so when did you do your like backpacking experience and camping experience?
I did a lot of that in Canada kind of before the Alaska to Argentina trip.
What about nothing in Australia? You didn't, I know you guys don't have mountains in Australia, but
very, very little. I kind of my brother got me into it like once or twice. We went backpacking, I guess, but I really didn't have time, or I was at university and just never really got into it that much. It wasn't until I got to Canada that I really loved the outdoors.
Yeah, I guess so. Part of the problem is just the lack of mountains, except for wherever the tallest mountain is. I think it's like 7,700 feet or something like that.
Yeah, in the Great Dividing Range. It's kind of over in the east.
Let's get into then, how did you decide to go to Africa? Why Africa? Why not Central Asia or one of these other places?
Yeah, when I got back from Argentina, I was pretty exhausted, and so I wasn't really ready to start planning a trip. But I knew eventually I'd want one. So I started saving money. Like that was the first step, and it was going to take a long time. And so while I was saving money, I just sort of was reading online, following other travelers, researching. And the more I thought about it, the parts of South America that I loved the most were the real wild wilderness, out there adventures across the salt flats in Bolivia, the Atacama Desert in Chile. The days when I was, 3 or 4 days away from civilization, that's the bits I loved the most. And then so when I talked to other travelers and when I researched online, it just kept coming up that like, go to Africa and you'll get really far off the map. And, you can go places where there's no tourists and, kind of hasn't been ruined yet. And so the more reading I did and the more I thought about it, it seemed like Africa would be an amazing adventure. And I started to really focus on it.
And how did you plan your route?
I realized that if I was going to go to the trouble of shipping a vehicle all the way over there, that I may as well try and see as much as I possibly could, because you've already invested the time and the money. And then, so I just came up with this plan to go right around the whole perimeter.
So where the vehicle, it came from where?
I shipped it from Canada.
Well, what part of Canada? Did you ship it from what part exactly? You were up in the Yukon.
I was up in the Yukon and I came down into southern Canada and kind of the US to build it. Because I built it into a house on reels. So it's got a fridge, it's got solar panels, a pop-up roof, it's got all these like living things to make it comfortable. And then I drove all the way across to the east coast of Canada to Halifax in Nova Scotia, put it inside of a shipping container, and it ocean freighted to Belgium. I flew across 2 weeks later, picked it up in Belgium, and then I drove down through France and Spain and caught a ferry to Morocco.
Got it. Okay. And how much did it cost to put it in that Halifax to Belgium ferry?
Yeah, it costs about $2,500 to ship a vehicle like that from anywhere in the world to anywhere in the world. roughly speaking.
Wow.
It's not that bad.
But then, I mean, anywhere in the world, I mean, it can't be the same price to ship it all the way to South Africa.
Kind of is, yep. If you find a shipping line, like maybe not from Halifax because maybe there isn't a direct route. So instead you drive down to like Jacksonville in Florida and then from there to South Africa, I know is really cheap. Friends have done it.
Right. So why not just ship it directly to Africa is, I guess, my question.
I figured that there would be a lot more bureaucracy and a lot more chance for bribery and, kind of funny business if it landed in Morocco. So it just seemed easier to ship it into a first world country and a country where I could speak English.
I see. Okay, yeah. All right, but in the end, you have to then cross borders and, do all that stuff. Did you had it's not called a laissez-passer, it's a carnet de passage?
I actually didn't have a carnet de passage, which is quite controversial because up until now, people would say it's impossible to drive around Africa without one. But I met other people doing it and we all did it successfully, so it can be done. And
you can add me to that list of people just like you.
Very cool.
Did not have a carnet de passage either. And I heard the same things you heard, which is, no, impossible. You'll never be able to do it.
Exactly.
And there are times where it's a pain in the ass, but you can always finagle away.
Exactly right. Well said.
The hardest part, at least one of the hardest border crossings for me, and I'm curious if it was for you, was going from Brazzaville to Kinshasa in that zone there, basically Republic of Congo to the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yep.
How did you deal with that?
Did you cross between the capital cities? Like, did you find a way to get across right there? Or did you go downstream further?
I went downstream further. I can't remember the name. There was a place where it cost $15 or 15 euros. Luozi? Yes, I think that's what it was called.
That's exactly where I crossed, and it was relatively painless.
Dude, you're smarter than you look.
I'll take that as a compliment, Francis.
Because I don't know if you planned that out or if you read that, but I did it the hard way. In other words, I went from Brazzaville and I went to the shipping area and I said, well, fuck, it's only a kilometer across to get to Kinshasa. I can fucking swim there, dude. Yeah. I could probably put my car on my back and swim across there. But so I said, how much is it? And it's like $500 or $600. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. I heard endless tales of bribery and like they get your vehicle on a boat and then suddenly they want another $500 and it just goes up and up and up.
I didn't hear that story, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty good negotiator. And I got it down to like $350, and I was like sure that was pretty much about as low as it's going to go. Yeah. And it wasn't going to go much lower. And I was just still found that so ludicrously high that I was like, all right, there's got to be a different way. And that's when I heard about Ludozi, whatever it's called. Luozi, that's right. Wow, you have a good memory. Okay, so now was that not your most difficult crossing, or what was a more memorable crossing for you?
Francis, I didn't have any crossings that were like an utter nightmare. I didn't have any where I, really struggled. Probably the most bureaucratic was Sudan into Egypt. That one is notorious with a vehicle for being just a pain of paperwork and hours. And actually I paid a fixer because they won't let you do it without one.
Right.
I would rather not pay for one, but I didn't have a choice at that border.
Right. Yeah. But it ended up taking, was that the longest as far as hours?
Yeah. It took about 6 hours, I think, from memory.
Yeah. And yet it is actually, aside from the Western Sahara, really the easiest place to cross the Sahara.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. In terms of infrastructure, like the roads were good and everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Try to do it any other way. It's a real challenge to go it any other way. Okay, so now let's dig down into the actual map itself. Now, let's help the listeners. You go to theroadchoseme.com, theroadchoseme.com, and you can see Dan Grec's, not just his adventure through Africa, but also you can learn about his Pan American Highway expedition. You can see photos of his Jeep and kind of all his overland tips. And also the 2 books that he's written. The Road Chose Me Part 1 and The Road Chose Me Part 2. So now I'm looking at your map, Dan, and you kind of were thinking about perhaps going from Liberia, which is in West Africa, and cutting across. I see a red dotted line, like perhaps that was your intended route, and then the blue line is your actual route?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us why. I guess you must have been, it looks like Guinea-Bissau or somewhere around there, that you decided to hang a left, I suppose, go east as opposed to go south.
I originally planned to go south down the west coast of Africa and then back north along the east. But at the end, from Egypt, I planned to drive back across through Libya and through Algeria. I had hoped to drive to Morocco, so to complete the full circuit of Africa.
Right. No, but I'm okay. We'll get to that, but and that is interesting. But I'm just talking about from, let's say, I don't. Did you go to Conakry?
I did. Yep. Oh,
okay.
I see where you mean. I didn't hug the coast. I didn't go through Sierra Leone and Liberia.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. And that's what I'm getting at. Is that
okay?
Originally, you seem to have intended to go through Sierra Leone and Liberia, but then instead you seem to have deviated and decided to go to the wonders of Mali.
Right. There was a couple of reasons for that. One, the borders were closed because of the big Ebola outbreak that they'd only just gotten under control.
That was 2014?
I think
15?
15 and 16 was when it was bad.
Okay,
so while I was in Guinea, it wasn't actually possible to drive into the Ivory Coast or into, I think Sierra Leone comes first.
Do you want me to tell you a secret just between you and me, Dan?
It's possible anyway?
No, it's just that I was there 6 months before the Ebola outbreak. I was there in 2014, 6 months before the Ebola outbreak. And I was the one who had concocted the Ebola thing in my laboratory, part of the CIA, and I infected the people of West Africa, and it's a conspiracy theory that is correct.
And were they trying to arrest you for that at every turn?
They would, but unfortunately they don't listen to podcasts, so I'm safe here.
That's good.
And so basically that is what caused the Ebola outbreak. And 6 months after I left, it went gangbusters, and that's exactly when you came. In fact, my real purpose was to thwart your trip and to get you to go to Mali, hoping that you would be kidnapped by Mali terrorists, because I figured you might be attracted to go to Timbuktu, but you ended up not going there. So tell us about the story there. So you avoided Ebola. You avoided my plague that I had purposely put along the footsteps that you were following.
Exactly right.
You deviated. You thwarted my grand plan.
I did. And there was another reason that you might not have planned for. It was the rainy season.
I should have thought of that.
In that part of the world, they get more rain in 1 month than the Pacific Northwest of the US gets in an entire year.
And for those who don't know, the Pacific Northwest gets a fucking lot of rain.
Yeah, so it was raining like 10 hours a day of the heaviest rain I've ever seen in my whole life. Like, so heavy I didn't even think it was real. And it got to the point I found mold inside the Jeep. I found mold on my clothes. And so I kind of hit my wit's end after about a month of that in Guinea-Conakry. And then so I heard that up in Mali, the rainy season was coming to an end because it's far enough north. And so basically that just locked it in for me of like, oh, I'm going to Mali. Got it. Easy choice. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense. And believe me, as somebody who drove through West Africa during the rainy season, I drove through Sierra Leone. I never got out of second gear, almost the entire country. It was, calling it a mudfest is really gentle.
I know exactly what you mean. It's insane, isn't it? It's like a different planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they live with it every year all the time, but they do. It's the spirit that they can
can
put
people.
up with it. Tough. Okay, so you get to Mali, go to Bamako, which how was Bamako, by the way?
Oh, I loved Bamako. I stayed a couple of months actually. It was great.
Fuck, really?
Yeah, stayed in the Sleeping Camel right there by the river. It was great.
Well, the Sleeping Camel, is that a name of a hotel?
Yeah, it's
resort?
like a backpacker / campground / overland hangout.
Did you get like some sweet deal, like $100 a month, and you get to stay there?
Well, that's about the regular price anyway. So yeah, because I was just camping in the Jeep in the parking lot.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just pay for the parking. Okay, and why did you decide to stay there? Did they just give you a 3-month visa or something?
No, actually, I had to go and extend my visa. I just loved it. You know, we were going out to see live music at night. I was eating street food. My French was improving a lot. We went up the river on a boat thing. Like, I just having a good time and wanted to stay longer.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I also extended my Mali visa when I was going through there. And It was relatively painless, I suppose. Yeah. The visa process is the part of traveling through Africa that I would say is the absolute worst part of the experience. I don't know if you would agree.
In West Africa, it definitely is like the big logistical challenge. It's the hardest part for sure. I don't want to say worst, but definitely hardest.
Well, what's worse than getting visas in Africa?
Getting malaria twice in Africa.
I got malaria 6 times, so I know what you mean.
Ouch.
Yes, I totally, that does kind of suck. But I don't know if yes, I almost died once of the 6 times. But the first time I got it, which was in Ghana, it wasn't bad at all. In other words, it felt like the flu.
Same for me. When I got it in Bamako, I was like, oh, this isn't such a big deal. What's everyone talking about?
What these guys bitching and moaning about. Come on, it's easy.
Tough.
Yeah. And then the second time hit you in the ass, and then what happened?
Yeah, then I thought I was going to die.
So wait, the first place was where? Where did you get it?
First place I was in Bamako in Mali.
Okay, and the second place?
Second time I was in Angola, just outside Luanda.
Okay, all the way down south there.
Yep.
Huh. You wouldn't think that, well, you mean maybe you got them bitten when you were in the Congo.
Maybe in the Congo, or I'd hung out in Luanda for like a week in capital cities, tons of people. And I do remember one night getting bitten quite a few times. And then it was kind of like a week after that I got sick. So I won.
Yeah, because usually, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that you're a bit safer in the cities because they have fewer places where water is still and it drained. But if it's the rainy season, even in the city, it could become infested.
Yeah, and I felt like they were worse simply because there's so many people, which means just more mosquitoes in general. Just kind of everyone's crammed in.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, you should know from the Yukon, I think there in the summertime, it's like mosquito city, right?
Yeah, they'll pretty much pick you up and carry you away if you're not careful.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're big fucking mosquitoes. The mosquitoes in Africa are these little shits.
Yeah, and you don't even know you're getting bitten until hours later, and then you're like, crap.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them both nice and not so nice, in the sense that when you get bitten by a mosquito in the Yukon, you will feel that welt for days.
That's
and you will be scratching and itching it for days. In Africa, if you get bitten, after a few hours, it's not that itchy anymore.
Exactly right. Unless you get malaria. And then suddenly everything goes to shit.
Right, but you don't feel itchy.
No, I guess not.
You just feel like you're going to die.
You just feel like you're going to die. So now, when I'm in the Yukon now and I get bitten, I try to be all zen about it. And I'm like, this is okay. I'm not getting malaria. Don't worry about it.
That's true.
Yeah.
I wonder if there was a time, I don't know if you know about the history, about whether there was a period where the big, giant Alaskan and Arctic mosquitoes, did they have malaria at one time? Because I know malaria was endemic in the United States.
Yeah, like Florida and the Carolinas and stuff used to have malaria for sure.
Correct. And I think even further north, a little bit further north than that as well. But I don't know if it ever got as far north as Canada.
Yeah, I have no idea. I kind of would assume the winter would take care of it, but I don't know.
Well, I see what you mean by just killing the plasmodium itself.
Yeah, but I have no idea.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and so you hung out in Mali for 3 or 6 months? Sorry,
like 2 months.
2 months, sorry. And then from there, you had a great time, and they have a famous music scene and all that stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, it was great.
Yeah. I didn't actually go to Bamako, but it was good. And Guinea is nice because of the mountains, and you probably got to see some of those.
I loved Guinea. It was one of my favorite countries.
Yeah, no, it's spectacular.
Yeah.
Okay, and then from there you drove down to Côte d'Ivoire. Did you go to Yamoussoukro, the capital?
I did go to Yamoussoukro, yeah, and I went to the big basilica.
So I'll tell you a funny story. I didn't even know the big basilica existed when I was driving through. And so for those who don't know, and probably most people don't know, Mali has a basilica that's bigger, I think, by a couple of meters than the one in the Vatican. Am I right?
Yeah, they say it's the world's biggest Catholic monument.
Correct. And so I didn't even know that. And I just went there and I was like, holy shit, what the fuck is this thing doing here in the middle of a sleepy capital? Because, by the way, Yamoussoukro is, as for those who haven't been there, it's a sleepy capital. And yet I went there and I was like, my goodness, this massive basilica church that just goes on and on. They spent the equivalent of, in today's dollars, probably $1 billion building that thing. And they got themselves severely in debt. There's a whole story about that anyway. But you did get to actually go inside of it, did you?
I did, yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and you're right. It's completely mind-bending and doesn't make any logical sense. Why the president was stroking his own ego, I guess. He wanted
right. He was from Yamoussoukro.
Right, and he wanted to have this big monument to his own superiority or something.
He had a small cock, is what it is. That's the reality of it.
I'm not going to say that because if I ever go back to
I
Ivory
saw
Coast...
I saw it. I was there.
I don't want his heavies to come after me, so I'm not going to say anything nasty about him.
I saw the autopsy. I've been there. I've seen it. He has a small penis. Trust me. Okay. And so he built this big, giant monument to himself. And then from there, he got the whole country in massive debt. But overall, the guy was a pretty good leader.
I think, I think he did all right. You could definitely do a lot worse by African leader standards.
That's right. Okay, and so from there, we continue on, and you went to Burkina Faso. Now, were you there? Because soon after I left Burkina Faso, I started another CIA kind of coup. I started that protest in the street. I was behind all that. But actually, so was there protests going on when you went to Burkina Faso?
There weren't any protests, no. And
is it after you left?
It must have been after I left because there'd been like a kidnapping maybe 6 months earlier or a bombing in the capital, Ouagadougou. But there wasn't protests while I was there, no.
Okay. So then maybe it happened just after?
Yeah, I'm not
must
sure.
have happened like immediately after, because I felt embarrassed, Dan, when I left Burkina Faso, because I spent, I don't know, at least a month or 2 months there, something like that. And I felt that everything was dandy and things were fine. And then soon after I left, less than a year, they erupted all these protests in the street because the president had declared that he wants to have a third term or a fourth term,
right.
Change the constitution like they often do.
Sure, doesn't want to give up power. Usual story.
Correct. And then this time it erupted in protests in the street, and I was embarrassed because I never saw it coming while I was there. I didn't sense any ferment in the streets and any kind of like people whispering about this whole, thing. Like, if that president tries to extend his term, we're going to rise up. None of that. So I missed it. And I guess you completely missed it yourself.
Yeah. And I think Africa's interesting like that in that people, they don't like to speak out against, their chief of the village or their tribal leader or the president. They kind of, because he is the big man, it's like you have to respect him and you have to follow him. And so I think most people do that kind of for a really, really long time until eventually something happens and then they snap and then they're like, now it's time for a coup. Now we have to kick this guy out. But kind of even like a week before a coup, everything feels fine. You wouldn't even know that like people are sort of hitting their limit.
Right. It's fascinating. Did you skip Ghana?
I did skip Ghana.
What, do you not like English speakers? What's your problem, dude?
They wouldn't give me a visa.
Fucking ass. Oh, yeah. You know why? Because you have to get it from your home country, right?
Exactly. They make that rule really strict where every embassy I went to, they're like, nah, we're not going to talk to you. Go to your home country.
So one of the only intelligent things I did during my trip to Africa was somehow, because I didn't really look at too many websites and do any research before I would go to countries, and somehow I had a few neurons in my brain that were alerting me to like look ahead. So when I was in Dakar in Senegal, somehow I found out that the Ghanaian embassy in Dakar is the only embassy in West Africa that is pretty lenient about that rule. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, is that there are some countries, approximately 5 countries in Africa, that insist that you get the visa to their country from your home country. And they will not issue you a visa. So let's say you want to go to the DRC and you're sitting in Cameroon. The Cameroon embassy will not issue you a visa for the DRC. They'll tell you to go to Washington, D.C. or wherever your home country is. And like I said, 5 countries do this, and one of them is Ghana.
Yeah.
And I somehow had the prescient notion of getting that visa from Ghana when I was in Dakar.
Perfect.
And now hearing your woes, it sounds like you did not go to Dakar.
I did not go to Dakar, no.
I mean, you went to Dakar, sorry, you didn't go to the embassy.
Right. I started trying to get that visa, I think. I tried in Conakry, I tried in Bamako, and I tried in Ouagadougou, and all of them said, go to your home country.
Yeah. And by the way, I did the same strategy with Algeria because Algeria has that same policy.
Okay.
And I tried in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. I tried again in Rwanda.
Yep.
And then I tried again, I can't remember what other country. And then finally it was in Chad, in N'Djamena, the capital of Chad, that finally I found a Algerian consul who was understanding of the story that I had, which is, well, I'm not going back I haven't been to my home country in years.
Yep.
I'm not planning to go back for a few years. I need a visa, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it, unfortunately, those are really hard to find, those sympathetic ears.
Yeah, and I think it's a question of perseverance. And so, Nigeria, I had to find a way to get it. You can't do the trip without getting Nigeria. So I persevered until I got it. But Ghana was kind of, once I looked on a map, I'm like, oh, I can just skip it. It's not a big deal.
Right, yeah. No, I understand. But it's still very frustrating. And I know that Nigeria has loosened up its policies.
It changes month to month right now. They're being pretty painful again. They're forcing people to get a police escort to the airport from the border of Togo. And then when you're at the airport, they'll issue you a visa, kind of using all the computers and everything they have at the airport. But apparently it's a right pain in the neck.
It sounds so Nigerian.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
God, let's make anything that could be simple, let's make it more complicated.
Yeah, more paperwork, more bribes, more people involved.
Exactly. Yeah. So very frustrating. But Nigeria is improving overall their visa thing.
Yes.
Especially with regard to other Africans visiting them, because they used to make it very difficult for other African countries to visit Nigeria.
Okay.
And now they are moving, believe it or not, to giving a visa to all Africans.
Ah, interesting.
Upon arrival.
Yep.
So I think once they do that, they'll realize that Europeans and Americans and Australians are also pretty safe bets.
Yeah.
And they're not really dying to immigrate to Nigeria and stealthily sneak in their country and do lots of business there.
Yeah.
And steal jobs from hardworking Nigerians. So once they realize that, they'll say, okay, well, I guess this might actually help our tourism a tiny bit.
Yeah.
And let's loosen up these controls. But it once again goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is the hardest part about Africa, or the most frustrating part is the visa process.
Definitely. And I think what a big difference too is when you fly into the airports, lots of countries have visa on arrival now, but crossing the land borders, they still don't understand what that means, or, they don't have computers at the land borders, so they can't do any of that stuff.
They sometimes don't have electricity.
That's right. Yeah. So land borders are usually a different story than if you land like in the capital city at the airport.
The flip side, though, Dan, and you probably would agree with this, I'm guessing, is that the advantage of land borders is that they sometimes have a lot more flexibility, especially a small land border.
That's right. I felt like they had ultimate flexibility. You could, if you were patient and friendly and polite, you could pretty much negotiate anything you wanted to.
And if you had a few extra bucks in your hand?
I tried really hard never to pay. That was kind of one of my rules. Really? Yeah, don't
You
pay.
are such a Boy Scout.
No,
the Boy Scout.
I'm cheap.
Yeah, I suppose. But I mean, it's sometimes, it's just so exhausting. They really do have all the time in the world. And usually I had all the time in the world. I remember one time in Burkina Faso, I was leaving, my visa had expired. And so I should have paid for a new visa, but I just waited them out. I waited 3 hours and finally said, just fuck it, get out of our country, leave.
Yep.
But sometimes the problem is when I've actually done something wrong or I need something, like I need a visa, I'm prepared to pay for that visa. And they may say, well, we can't issue you one. And then that's when I got a bribe. I guess I need something.
That's right. Yeah, when they kind of have you in a sticky situation, that's when they hold all the power, and that's when bribing kind of becomes an option.
Dan, how much time did you spend in Togo?
I wasn't in Togo very long. I'm going to say a week, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So that's roughly the same amount of time I spent there, and it's I feel ashamed because that was the one country I actually want to spend a lot more time in because nobody's ever fucking heard of Togo.
Right.
So I wanted to become the world's expert in Togo. And Unfortunately, a 1 week is just not going to get you there.
No. And I really liked it. It was a lot cleaner and more organized than, the bordering countries. And people were really friendly. People were upbeat. I thought it has a really bright future ahead of it. So it seemed like
did you
nice
find
place.
who are the cocksuckers in Africa? I mean, did you find any people who were really difficult?
No, I had a rough go in Ethiopia.
Okay.
But no, I never found any people that were horrible. But, for example, in Benin, right next to Togo, I just felt like it was extremely dirty and run down and, it just didn't feel kind of as vibrant or as happy. It kind of felt more like drudgery, just in comparison. I mean, people were still friendly, but it just didn't seem to be kind of as well organized or as well put together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was one of, because in general, I mean, I'm sure you would agree that in Africa, people are extremely friendly.
Out of this world friendly and happy and vibrant and just shrug their shoulders and get on with being happy because what else are you going to do?
So, but there's plenty of reasons, I guess they could be miserable, but for you, the places that you found a little bit of on the other side of the spectrum of friendliness, you would say it was in Benin, maybe a little bit less friendly and of course your Ethiopia experience.
Yeah, and even I wouldn't say Benin was less friendly, more like just the country itself, kind of dirty and not organized compared to Togo. And it was like such a stark difference to drive from Togo into Benin. It felt like I'd driven into a different world.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I didn't find it, you're talking about from Lomé to Cotonou.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Cause I didn't notice that big of a difference. I would say, I would agree with you, but I didn't see like, wow, I do remember there was a gleaming kind of skyscraper. I mean, it wasn't very tall skyscraper, maybe about 10 stories in Togo, in Lomé. There was a nice shiny thing and they had this long beach.
Yeah. And Lomé has like really clean streets and like reasonably sane traffic and kind of, good roads and stuff. And then I drove into Cotonou and it was just like crumbling and there was trash, knee deep on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Although trash in Africa is pretty common.
Yeah, pretty hard to get away from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then from there you struggle. Where did you finally, or how did you finally get your Nigerian visa? Because again, one of the challenges that people like you who are overlanding is that you got to get these visas as you go. You can't be sitting in Australia or Canada and then say, well, in about 2.5 years' time, I'm going to be in Nigeria, entering by this border at this crossing at this time.
Exactly right. So it becomes this huge, big logistical game of like, where am I going to get all the visas? And there's quite a network now of overlanders who are driving West Africa. Not a ton of people, but kind of enough that share information about where you can get which visa.
What is your favorite website for getting that information?
iOverlander is really good these days. It's actually...
Did you say iOverlander?
Yes. And it's an app for cell phones, but it also has a website component. And it's crowdsourced data about like where are the embassies, where are the borders, where are the campgrounds, stuff like that. So it has really good information put in by real travelers, like real overlanders. So I had a pretty good list of where to get all the visas. And at the time, the embassy in Bamako in Mali was known to issue Nigerian visas. And it took just over a week to get it, but they did give me one. And, they asked a ton of questions and I had to go back there multiple times, but in the end it worked. So
in Bamako?
In Bamako, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And my backup
so I was way ahead of getting there.
Yeah, that's right. But it was really good because they give you 6 months to enter.
Good.
And then your visa's valid for 1 month from whatever day you happen to enter. So
I love it when they do it that way.
Oh, I know. It was so nice.
Yeah. The worst are the people who say, well, your visa is starting today and ends in 1 month. I'm like, fuck you.
And it's like 3 countries away. And you're like,
exactly.
What am I going to do with that?
We're giving you a 1 week visa and it's starting now and it's going to take you about 10 days to get there.
Yeah. I would always negotiate so hard on those ones. Like Sudan did that actually. And I was like, no, that's not. And so I just negotiated.
Sudan, one of the biggest countries in the world.
Yeah. I just negotiated.
We're going to give you a 2-day visa.
An hour until eventually they were like, okay, you can have a 1 month visa instead of a 1 week visa. And I'm like, okay, that's good. And I'm like, and I don't want it to start until a month from now. And they were like, what? And so I just round and around and like pulled out a map of Africa and showed them my trip and showed them my book. And then they were like, okay, whatever. And the dude just like changed it in my passport and was like, get out of here.
Did he like just bust out a pen and scribble it out?
Yeah, he got out, what do you call that stuff? Correction ink, like the white,
Great.
white
I
out
love
stuff.
this.
Yeah, so in my
See,
passport.
this is a criminal like me loves this shit
I
because I
know.
would just bust out the same little correction ink and do it myself and
Well,
just say it was the ambassador who did it.
I was worried. I thought when I got to the border, they were going to give me a hard time about it. They didn't say a word. They didn't care.
No, exactly. It's so beautiful. I love it. And the best ones are like the small borders. That's when just nobody really pays attention or cares. They have no electricity or computers.
right.
They can't check you.
That's right.
And so it's just like,
I thought it was
Great.
always better to go to small borders for that reason. And
Yes.
then, like, nobody's stressed. Nobody's yelling at anybody. You just show up and be like, oh, hey, guys, how are you? Nice to meet you. Nice day. Like, and someone's like, oh, everyone's away on lunch. I'm like, oh, no problem. Like, I'll go and have lunch as well. Like, just be, like, really easygoing. And then
Right.
when they get back from lunch, they're happy to stamp your stuff and be like, see ya.
yeah, exactly. It might take a little bit longer sometimes, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I've got nowhere to be. No big deal.
So I'm looking, maybe I'm reading too much into your map, Dan,
No,
but
no.
I'm looking at around the Cameroon and there's like a circle
Yep.
of some sort. Like you're going around in circles there.
Yep, I did exactly that.
You just went to Cameroon to drive around in circles.
Pretty much. Yep, that's exactly what I did.
So you're admitting to the world that you're an idiot.
I'm bad at planning, and I make stuff up.
Or you
as I
don't
go.
know how to drive, or your car was stuck in the circle. I couldn't turn.
That's
All
it.
right. Okay, so give us a story. What happened?
You know, Cameroon has that mountainous region. What do they call that? The something mountains of the ring road in the mountains.
Yeah, the ring road. Yeah.
Around Bamenda. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I just wanted to explore.
Bamenda, by the way, for those who don't know, is the English-speaking Anglophone region.
Right. And so I just wanted to look around. So I drove. Yeah, I really did drive in a circle so I could see everything in that area.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, what about when you went there? Was the separatists in Cameroon, which are trying to create a country called Ambazonia, was any of that fermenting and starting there, or was that after you left?
I drove right into the middle of all of it. The government had cut off the internet. And
So wait, you started it.
yeah.
You're the fucking Anglophone that went in there and started it.
Well, actually, I was traveling with a German couple, and the people of Cameroon were asking the Germans to help them because they're like, hey, you colonized us in the first place. We want you to come back and colonize us again and help us because we'd rather have German masters than deal with these French a-holes. Yeah, it was pretty wild.
What? And they didn't say that. They said, well, what about your British brothers?
No,
They asked for the Germans. They didn't ask for the British.
Exactly right. They asked for the Germans. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I would ask for the Germans too. They know how to run countries, you know?
And so it was pretty touchy, actually. When we drove into Bamenda, it was like 3 days before Cameroon's Independence Day. But of course, the people in that region didn't want to celebrate because they were, they're sick of Cameroon. So actually, the government was sending in like hundreds of soldiers and they were going to force people to celebrate at gunpoint. Literally, they were going to point guns at them until they started celebrating.
That's what I'm going to do on my birthday.
Exactly, yeah. The beatings will continue until morale improves. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah. So it was a bit touchy, actually, and we had a bit of an incident where the military came into our camp at night and got us out of the vehicles, and they weren't happy with us at all.
Wow, interesting.
But
And
it
so
worked out fine.
now you went to Gabon. Gabon is a country again that you need to get your visa from your home country.
Yeah,
but
Gabon was one I organised a long way ahead as well.
You're a very smart man. So that has also, by the way, recently changed in the last year or so, where they've kind of loosened that up. I don't know if it's visa on arrival or it's an automatic. Anyway, it's something like that. They've gotten a little bit better.
They're all getting slightly better now.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that is great news for the continent and for those who don't live on the continent, for everybody.
Right. Exactly, yep.
It's fantastic news. Okay, so then you went to Gabon.
Yep.
And Libreville is a beautiful capital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved Gabon, one of my favourite countries.
And then from there, you went to the Republic of Congo. You
That's right.
dropped down into Brazzaville. We talked about the crossing just downstream on the Congo River, downstream of Kinshasa and Brazzaville.
Yep.
And then you got into Luanda, capital of Angola, which then you got your malaria,
Yep.
which nearly knocked you out.
Exactly.
How bad did it get? Like, did your fever? Do you remember how your temperature was?
Oh, I was just like on the side of the road with my friends. I didn't go to a clinic or anything.
What?
So I didn't have. Oh well, we had the injectable version of the medicine. We had Artithum with us. So my friends were giving me a needle in my butt twice a day. But I didn't have like a thermometer or anything, so I don't know how high my fever was. But it was bad.
Oh, goodness. Why didn't you just go to a clinic?
Well, we were like 200 miles from a clinic and I couldn't drive. And I don't know, staying put just seemed like the right thing to do.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Fascinating. Okay. And then from there, you went down to Windhoek into Namibia, which was about, and then your original plan was to do what most people do, which is go straight down to South Africa. But you decided to go east into Botswana.
Yep.
And you went to the Caprivi
Strip. Yep.
Caprivi Strip. Thank you.
Yep.
For those who don't know, which probably most people don't know, the Caprivi Strip is, if you look closely at a map of Namibia, you'll see in the northeast corner a spear-like thing sticking out and stabbing Botswana effectively, and I guess Angola. And it's part of Namibia, but it's just jutting out through there. And I suppose you know the story behind that Caprivi Strip?
I can make it up. I remember it has something to do with, is it Zambia wanted access to the coast, and so they needed to just be bordered by one country, not by two? Something like that.
That's a good story. And in some ways, it is somewhat correct. From what my understanding is, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, is that the British wanted to get the Germans, sorry. Is it the Germans or the British? Now I'm all fucked up.
In that part of Africa, I'd guess British, but I don't know.
No, but I think it's the Germans actually, but maybe it's I think it's the Germans who want to connect Tanzania and Namibia.
Ah.
And so that was one of their ways that they were kind of on their way to connecting the two countries, because they were both German at some point.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Prior to World War I. If it's not that story, then it's the British who were trying to connect to do their Cape Town to Cairo kind of thing. But anyway, so what I'm 90% sure is that it's a colonizer who wanted to connect, I think, Namibia with Tanzania.
Yep. Yeah.
And so they were kind of like making their way, and they traded a lot of money or land in order to get that Caprivi Strip.
Yep. Yeah. It sounds right to me that they needed that because it guaranteed Namibia access to more countries, because otherwise it was going to be blocked by Botswana.
I mean Zambia.
Or Botswana, if Botswana had have just extended north until it hit the border of Angola.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm sorry for those who are listening who can't follow along with the map. I guess they need a map to follow along. But, okay. And then from there, you did all sorts of crazy shit in Botswana. How long did you spend in Botswana?
About a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you do any safaris? Because I imagine
I went into a bunch of the big national parks, and because I had my own Jeep, I just drove myself around. But yeah, went into like the Okavango Delta and Moremi and Central Kalahari. And I mean, they are just stunning. Like I can't wait to go back there. Some of the most beautiful parts of Earth I've ever seen in my whole life. Super friendly people, super wild places, like breathtaking.
And why did you go from Namibia to Botswana as opposed down to South Africa?
It was kind of a timing thing. I was having a friend fly into Johannesburg and just trying to organize how do I get to see as much of Southern Africa as possible without doing too much backtracking. And at the time, that just made sense, so that's what I did.
Okay,
does it actually make sense? Maybe not, but oh well, that's what I did.
No, it does make sense. It totally makes sense. Yeah. Okay, and then from there, you seem to have spent at least a month, if not 2 months, in South Africa.
Yeah, I think it was like 8 weeks between South Africa and Lesotho I went into on 5 different occasions. Yeah.
And what did you think of South Africa?
South Africa is a very difficult place. I feel bad about saying it, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. I don't think it's doing very well right now. I think, there's a lot of deep-seated hatred. There's a lot of racism on both sides of the fence. And they're in for a really tough time, I think, because, the white people treated black people horrendously bad for decades, like worse than I ever imagined possible. And now the black people kind of saying, well, now it's your turn. Like, you get what you deserve.
Right. No, I think you summed it up so well. I agree with you 100% on everything. And it's fascinating. I didn't even prompt you, to try to, bias your answer at all. I just asked you, what did you think?
Yep.
Open-ended. And you came up with an answer that I would have said word for word the same things, effectively. It's
It's
a
difficult.
total shame.
It is real, and it's beautiful, and there are a ton of friendly people, and it's trying really hard, but there's a lot of deep-seated anger and hatred there that's going to be really hard to deal with.
Do you think that the future bodes well for South Africa in the next 20 years, or do you think, in other words, will they be able to get around that?
I really hope so. I really hope they can find a way to work together, but while I was there, I didn't see it.
Yeah. No, I was trying to imagine. I figured that it felt like, even though I wasn't born at that time, but when the 1965, mid-1960s in the United States was the Civil Rights Revolution, when all of a sudden blacks became, granted they were emancipated 100 years before 1965, but
right.
It was in 1965 when all of a sudden a lot of the laws that were against them started to loosen up, and there was, and desegregation was happening and things like that. But I imagine it was similar, where this kind of intense hatred, and here we are in 2020, and still there's a lot of racial tension between blacks and whites in the United States, even though we got rid of our apartheid back in 1965 because we had it until then. And then so to me, that smells like, okay, well, South Africa is going to have 50 years to get over not just one generation. They need 2, maybe 3.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
The only difference in the whole dynamic is the fact that the blacks in South Africa are the majority versus in America, they're only 12%.
They're the huge majority in South Africa.
Yeah. They're about 80% or 80, maybe 85.
Yeah. I think it's 85. It's high.
Yeah. So as a result, in some ways, I remember reading a book by an Indian woman from South Africa, Indian descent. She's South African, but anyway, and the title of the book is "What Would Happen If All the Whites Left South Africa?" Very provocative title.
Yep.
And unfortunately, she doesn't really answer it with black and white answer, like a very clear answer. But she does speak about this idea of like the black South Africans often use similar arguments that the black Americans, the African Americans, black Americans use. And she, as a kind of, I guess you could call it objective, she's Indian descent in South Africa, kind of just look, she's neither white, she's neither black. And she was like, she didn't get it. She was like, wait, it's a different story because here in Africa, now they have, in South Africa, the blacks actually have the political power. They may not have all the economic power, which is their point, which is, well, the whites still control the money. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Yep.
But they felt that, but they're using some of the same victimization narrative that is easier to justify in the United States than it is in South Africa when the political power rests solidly in the black majority.
Yep.
And I just thought, that there's a lot of truth to that. And I just couldn't see how South Africa is going to get themselves out of that mess.
That's exactly how I felt as well. I don't even know what the path forward looks like. It's really, really difficult.
And meanwhile, there's a white flight going on. First of all, white people in South Africa have fewer babies than the blacks. And so as a result, even if they were not to emigrate, to leave, even if that were the case, they'd be going down. 100 years ago, 20% of South Africa was white. 20%. Oh, wow. 1 in 5 was white.
Yep.
Today, it's about 8%.
Yep.
And it's been steadily declining ever since they got their independence in 1994.
Yep.
So, it's a heavy topic, and
it is very heavy. And it was always really, really amazing to drive from South Africa either into Lesotho or Swaziland or Botswana, any of the neighboring countries. And within 5 minutes, you could just breathe a huge sigh of relief because those countries, they're not like that. They don't have that same racial tension. And immediately you just feel safer and happier and more welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, day and night.
100% agree. as they say in South Africa, 100%. And they say shame all the time. Anyway, so, okay, and then let's go on to happier lands, which is Mozambique and Zimbabwe.
Yep.
Well, Zimbabwe is not much happier. It's got its slew of issues.
Yeah, and I was there at an interesting time too. They kicked out Mugabe about 3 months before I got there in the coup.
Okay.
But they hadn't yet had the election where they voted in, what's his name, Mnangagwa?
Yeah, Mnangagwa.
Yeah, who was his right-hand man and who is just as bad as Mugabe was.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's still there.
He's still there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, still ruining the country, still driving it into the ground. But, you know, I loved Zimbabwe. More than any other country, I thought about actually staying, like I could live there. Never once in my 6 weeks did I hear a single person complain about anything. Zimbabweans have the most amazing positive attitude, the most like, let's just find a way anyway. And they have this saying, let's make a plan. It's like, there's no gas in the gas station, there's no money in the ATM, there's no food in the supermarket, but we all want to go camping this weekend. All right, let's make a plan. We'll find a way. It's like, what are you talking about? And they would do it. And they would do it with a smile on their face.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Did you go to Mozambique twice?
No, just the once.
Okay, got it. Okay, so it wasn't clear on the map, but yeah, I can see you just went to Malawi. Okay.
Yep.
So from there, Zambia.
Yep.
And then Malawi, and then into Tanzania.
That's right.
And then you went to hot Dar es Salaam.
I did go to Dar, which, was interesting, and across to Zanzibar for a couple of nights. That was fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then, but then you just left your Jeep, obviously, on the mainland in Dar.
I did, yep.
All right. And then from there, you cut across to go to Burundi and Rwanda.
That's right. Which
were, I imagine, you enjoyed?
Yeah, Burundi was great. It felt exactly like being back in West Africa. It felt like the Congo, and I loved it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
You know, French-speaking, kind of less developed, really friendly, really raw, and it was great. Right. I loved it. Yeah.
And then Uganda.
Yep.
And then Kenya, and then your woes began in Ethiopia. You kind of alluded to that earlier. What exactly happened in Ethiopia that kind of left a sour taste in your mouth?
Ethiopia, it's one of those countries I think that changes rapidly. And so although I didn't have a great time, I know plenty of people love it and list it as their favorite country. So I wanted to start with that. But when I was there, like the new president sort of hasn't been in power very long. And she's giving lots of people power to like finally, you're allowed to talk badly about the president. Like that's not illegal anymore. You know, you have all these new freedoms. And so I think a lot of people were kind of acting up on that and they were kind of playing out this idea we can do what we want. And for a lot of people, that kind of meant behaving badly to tourists. And so I never experienced any direct violence, but very close to it. And friends of mine were attacked. Other overlanders were attacked at the same time. We met a guy on a bicycle who was almost beaten to death. So it just wasn't, it didn't feel like a happy place to be. And then on top of that, even when I was in national parks and things, the people I was dealing with were just angry at me and just like yelling at me, even though I was paying them money to be inside their national park. So it just didn't really feel like they were in a place to be accepting tourists. How
many weeks were you there?
About 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on top of that, to cap it all off, at the time, there was lots of fighting going on between the tribes of Ethiopia, who were all near the borders, and the Ethiopian military, who were trying to reclaim all this territory that the previous president gave away. So the border between Kenya and Ethiopia was literally a war zone. I met people who saw dead bodies in the street and got shot at and all of that. So it was sketchy getting into Ethiopia. Then the border to Djibouti was the same thing. That was sketchy. And then the border to Sudan was even worse. There was many people killed and lots of burnt out vehicles and houses. And so Ethiopia didn't feel safe, and it didn't feel like I was welcome at all.
Interesting. Interesting. Fascinating. And so from there, you mentioned Djibouti, which I felt was the hottest part of Africa.
And I was there in the winter, and it still maybe was the hottest part of Africa. I kept telling people, I don't know how you do it. It's so hot. And they were like, what do you mean? This is nothing.
Was it like December or something?
It must have been. Yeah, it was. It was, or January. It was first week of January. And
you're
so they were
lucky.
It's only 105. This is nothing. Don't even talk about this. Come back in the summer. It'll be 130 every day.
It really, and the thing that kills you in Djibouti is that it's also humid.
Yeah.
It's very humid at least the time I was.
Yeah. When I was there, it was as well, and it's hard to take, isn't it?
It's infernal.
debilitating.
Yeah, it is.
But I loved it. That was one of the most like Martian landscapes I've ever seen in my life.
Right. Did you go to the lowest point of Africa?
I did, yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I
that's
went out
Lake
to,
Assal.
That's right. Yeah, and also out to Lake Abbey, which is kind of the volcanic region, which has these crazy rock formations.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you decided to just avoid Somaliland because a lot of people actually go to Somaliland.
You know, I looked into Somaliland and I was really tempted, but it was going to require a double entry visa to Djibouti and or Ethiopia, and it just logistically started.
But wait, you had a double entry visa for Ethiopia because you had to go to Djibouti and out of Djibouti.
That's a funny story. I didn't have a double entry visa. They wouldn't give me one. And then when I was in Addis Ababa, I tried to convert my single entry into a double entry. And they said it might take 3 weeks and they might not be able to do it. So that was silly. So in the end, I actually drove into Djibouti with no way to get back to Ethiopia. And then, so I'm like shitting myself. I go down.
Yeah, you're taking a big gamble there.
I was.
It could have ended your trip.
It could have ended my trip. So
You would have had to put your thing on a boat and then maybe go up to Sudan's Port Sudan up there.
I kind of had a backup plan, talking about your criminal dealings with your passport. I had a plan, but anyway, so I go racing into the embassy, but it was Friday, whatever day is their weekend that isn't out. It was Friday, I think, because that's their weekend. And so they're like, oh no, the embassy's closed. You'll have to come back on like Monday. So I had to like shit myself for the weekend, thinking I can't get back into Ethiopia. Finally go into the embassy, like pretty much ready to beg, can I please have a visa? The guy behind the counter's like, oh, whatever, like, fill this form out. Oh, yeah, it's $30. Okay, stamp, see you later. Like, it was easy. So I just got another single entry visa for Ethiopia.
Just like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. But
all that stress for nothing.
I think my backup plan was going to be okay because when I left Ethiopia, I really befriended the immigration guy, you know, and he knew that I had just come from Ethiopia. He knew I was coming back. My plan was basically just go to him and just be like, hey, dude, I was here like 5 days ago.
And you saw him again?
Yeah, it was him again.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that was
Very
kind of my
smart
backup plan.
Yeah, that is a smart plan. Good job.
It's the only one I had.
Exactly. And then from there, you got into Sudan. Now, Sudan, at that point, they had not yet overthrown Bashir.
No, I was there about 2 weeks before they overthrew Bashir. So they were.
So you were the plant there.
Yeah, they were protesting in Khartoum big time. I was told to stay out of certain regions of town. They were like out on the streets.
But you went to Khartoum anyway.
Yep. Oh, like where I was fine. It was people were really friendly. Like some of the friendliest people I've ever met in my life.
Once again, a very fascinating comment by you because I didn't put words in your mouth, but that's exactly how I felt. I felt that out of all the African nations, none was more hospitable than Sudan.
Yeah, and that's we need to be clear there. The other countries are very hospitable. Somehow Sudan manages to outdo them, which is impressive.
True.
Yep.
But I will say this, and I agree with you what you said. However, one thing that often happens in Africa is people are constantly begging you for money or objects or something or whatever.
Yep.
And it's a very take situation where they're kind of sucking stuff out of you. However, in what made Sudan special for me was that it was the only African country, probably, that I was being given more than I was giving. In other words, that people were saying, I'm going to pay for this drink for you. I'm going to do this. Don't pay that. Do this. You know, I'm going to give you a ride for free or whatever it is. And that was truly unique in the continent.
So now we've just done the same thing in reverse. You just said that without me prompting you, because exactly the same thing happened to me. You know, these dudes went out of their way to find me some bread because it was hard to find in the city, and they refused to take my money. They would not let me pay for it.
Yeah.
Someone invited me for tea and lunch.
Which will almost never, ever happen on the rest of the continent.
Right.
No African in their right mind, you offer them money, it's very rare that they will refuse, especially after multiple attempts.
That's right. Yep.
It's very rare.
Yep.
They'll always say, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll take it. And
I had people buy lunch for me. I had people buy coffee and tea for me, and they would refuse my money. It didn't matter how hard I tried. They just wouldn't take it.
And I guess I don't know, it's like a special Sudanese thing, because you might be tempted to say it's like a Muslim thing, Muslim hospitality, but there's plenty of Islamic countries in Africa and they don't behave the same way. So it's not Islamic thing.
No.
And it's not a North African-ish thing because Egyptians don't behave the same way.
That's right.
And
Mauritanians weren't the same.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something. It's in the water of Sudan.
I think it's Sudanese people are just...
What happens is that the confluence of the White Nile and the Blue Nile creates this water that's very special that when you drink it, you become extremely generous. I'm sticking with that story.
That's a good story. Yeah, they were unbelievable, wasn't it? They're putting up with such horrible conditions under Bashir, but they still managed to be so kind and so generous. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. And when people ask me, where should I go visit in Africa that's off the beaten track, Sudan is often on the top of the list.
Yeah, and it's stunningly beautiful too. Like the desert is just mind-blowing. It doesn't make sense.
Did you get to see any of their pyramids?
I did, yeah. I went to quite a few of them.
Okay, great.
Yeah, camped right beside them. It was great.
Great. No, it's spectacular. A lot of people don't realize that Sudan has so many pyramids. And so from there, you did that long, complicated border crossing in Egypt.
Yep.
And then eventually you drove along the Nile. Yep. To get to Cairo. And originally, you had planned to go through Libya until I overthrew Gaddafi.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
And I ruined your party again.
You did.
And so did you at what point did you know that you were not going to be going through Libya?
It was probably back in Ethiopia. In Addis, I tried to get a visa for Libya, and there was just no universe. They wouldn't even really talk to me. And then I started hearing from other travelers too that there's the Western Desert Road in Egypt. I don't know if you know about it. It cuts through like the White Desert and the Black Desert. It's a north to south road that's like further west than the Nile, and it's kind of the one and only. And when I was there last year, the Egyptian military had orders to shoot anyone on site who was west of that road. So what that meant was there was a 0% chance the Egyptian military would even let me get to the Libyan border. Even if I had a valid visa, they wouldn't let me go there.
Right.
The Egyptian military are really, really paranoid about white people getting into trouble in their country. They really want to look after white people. So they basically don't let you drive anywhere that they think is dangerous.
Yeah, although, I did go to the Sinai Peninsula at the time, and that was interesting, but you're right, in general, they are kind of cautious.
I really wanted to go to the Sinai, and because that was then my other plan. Instead of going across the top of Africa, I'd drive into Israel and ship out of there so that at least I could kind of like drive off Africa, finish Africa in that way. And the Sinai, when I was there a year ago, they had this really interesting rule. They didn't care if I went as a white person and got kidnapped. They're like, yeah, whatever, you can go. They wouldn't let me take my Jeep because they don't want the Jeep to get kidnapped and then used against them by the bad guys.
What a ridiculous...
Apparently, if you ride a crappy motorbike or if you have like some crummy car, they'll let you go. Yeah. But in like well-equipped four-wheel drive, they won't let you drive across the Sinai. So, yeah.
Wow.
Who knows?
And then what about in your future plans? Do you ever want to, I imagine there's a lot of countries that you did leave out. I mean, you left out Chad and Niger and...
Central African Republic. Absolutely.
Yeah. South Sudan, you missed out on that wonderful paradise.
Yeah. I've heard the northern part of Chad is one of the most beautiful places on earth, where the desert has those big sandstone formations.
I climbed the tallest mountain of Libya, which is right on the Chad-Libya border.
Oh, wow.
So those are the Tbilisi Mountains.
Wow.
And you're right. It is truly a wonderful alien landscape and is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So you got to Alexandria?
That's right. Yep.
And then from there, what happened to you took your car and put it on a ferry?
I put it in a shipping container and I shipped it actually directly back to Canada from there.
Wow. And that cost $2,000, $3,000?
Yeah, it was about $3,000, I think.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. And then from there, you took a flight eventually to Canada, or you?
That's right. Yeah, I flew through Australia to visit family because the shipping for that took about 3.5 weeks, I think. So I hung out in Australia and then flew to Canada.
Now your book that you've written, which again, to remind listeners, it's The Road Chose Me, Part 2, which is about his Africa trip, is you kind of like got it out really fast. Like you finished your trip in 2019. Am I correct?
I finished my trip a year ago. I got back, I left Africa on March 10th. So almost exactly a year ago today.
My birthday. Okay, so you left on March 10th,
Yep.
and that was a year ago.
Yep.
But then your book has already come out, or it's like
it's
well,
nearly finished. Yeah, I'm running a Kickstarter right now, so it's
Thank
nearly
you.
done.
So now is your time to plug the Kickstarter.
So yep, Kickstarter, The Road Chose Me Volume 2. You can get the book, you can get my other books, you can get stickers and patches and lots of goodies.
And I will put links to his Kickstarter on the show notes. It's ending on what date in March?
It ends on March 14th, so we have 10
March
days
14th,
from today.
2020.
Yes.
And so if this episode will release soon, and that way people will have a few days to participate. What's the cheapest level of, or what's the cheapest amount for them to just get the book if that's what they want? Is it $25?
Yeah, it's about $22 just for the book.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a limited edition version that has full color photos in the interior, and that's the idea of the Kickstarter, to get this limited edition printed at an affordable price.
Right. And so those at this point, as we're recording this, which is about 2 weeks to go, what percentage you've hit your goal?
I have actually hit my goal. Yeah, so the Kickstarter is definitely going ahead, which is super exciting.
Fantastic! Congratulations. How much money have you?
Thank you.
How much? What by the way, I don't like to say money raised. A lot of people talk about Kickstarter as if it's a charity. And I'm like, no, it's not a fucking charity. Think of it as pre-sales.
Exactly.
It's like,
and it's hard too, because the dollar amount that it's showing also includes postage and the printing costs and the taxes that I have to pay and the 20% I have to give to Kickstarter.
Is it 20%? I thought it was 10%.
It went up to 20.
Fuck you. Really?
Yeah.
Dude, that sucks. 20% to Kickstarter, those greedy bastards.
So right now I've raised about 10,000 US, which is great. It means I can order a big enough batch. Currently it's about 160 people have pledged. But yeah, I mean, it's not like all of that's going in my pocket by any means.
Yeah, and that's the thing that pisses me off. A lot of people are like, I donated to your cause. I'm like, you didn't donate to the Kickstarter.
No,
You're
just
getting
pre-bought
a product. Exactly.
Yeah.
You pre-bought it. You
Yeah.
bought it. You like pre-ordered. That's all you did.
Yeah, that's right.
And I appreciate that. I thank you for that.
Yeah.
I love that, but let's not put you on a pedestal. It's not like a GoFundMe campaign. GoFundMe campaigns, you're asking money for almost nothing. Like I have cancer, give me money, I can help my cancer treatment.
Yeah.
And that's, and do it. I can't afford to go to college, give me money, I'm going to go to college.
Right.
And that's true charity.
Right.
But most Kickstarters are giving you something for your money.
Yeah.
And that's just pre-ordering it. You're getting, you're an early adopter of the product, which is wonderful. And otherwise it helps people do these things like you're doing, a limited edition color photos and that kind of stuff. It couldn't be done otherwise, or at least it would be very expensive otherwise.
Yeah.
So it is grateful, but don't think that Dan is a beggar who's asking for charity. He's just asking you to buy a product that he's made and has worked hard on and took years of travel to do, and for just $22 you can learn about his crazy adventure to Africa. And if you spend nearly $50, I guess you'll get your other book, right?
That's right. Yep. And then there's a photography book as well and some other stuff.
Right. So, and now I imagine the only way you can do this so quickly is you have to self-publish in order to make it happen. Otherwise, publishers don't publish that fast.
That's right. I'm self-publishing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think it's the smart strategy to do, unless you're some super famous person with a following of 1 million people of whatever. And a lot of people, and that allows you to do this so quickly. And that's the advantage. And I'm embarrassed because I haven't finished my Africa book, and you finished your trip after me and you finished your book already. I'm like, God, I'm such a loser. I'm a complete loser. Dan is like the man.
Seems like you've got some other things on the go.
Not really. I'm a fucking loser. Dan's the man. I admire your diligence. So my question to you is were you writing on the road? Because pumping out a book in a year's time, that's almost impossible.
Yeah, I was writing quite a bit on the road, and I was keeping a journal. And a lot of this stuff, it's not only like the adventures I had and the misadventures I had, it's a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today. about what are my feelings on Africa and what do I think about the situation in this country, or what do I think about foreign aid, or, the media's perception of Africa. And a lot of that stuff I really needed to get down on paper to help me understand it and to help get it off my chest. And so it's been really healthy for me to sort of sit down and hammer it out and really feel that I've released it. And now I'm really proud that I'm going to let it out into the wild so that people can, I don't know, kind of see it through my eyes or have the same sort of perspective that I have now that I've been there for so long.
I think I might want to read, I know I would love to read your book, because I'm sure that you faced a big dilemma, which is what I'm facing. And one of the reasons I'm struggling so much with your book is that you have a pigmentation problem.
I do.
You're white.
Yes.
And as a result, I wrote a book about Eastern Europe, and I sometimes would criticize Eastern Europeans, make fun of them, do that kind of stuff, and gave my honest, blunt opinion about Eastern Europe, and nobody really batted an eye, even Eastern Europeans themselves. But I find myself doing the same thing with Africans, because all countries have flaws and shortcomings and oddities and idiosyncrasies and things that irritate you, etc. But when you do that with black people, suddenly you are a fucking racist. And that makes white people gun shy about saying anything critical about Africa without knowing that the politically correct police is going to crucify you for your thoughts.
That's right.
How did you deal with that?
It's been really hard for me, Francis, since I got back, because when I was in Africa, people would just walk up to me and say, hello, white. My name was LeBlanc, the white. But, they're not being racist in any way. They're not being, they're just telling the truth. And so it became quite common that I could just call them black and, refer to them as black people, not because I'm being criticizing or in any way degrading them, because, if someone called me tall, it just is a fact. The fact is I have white skin and they have black skin, and that's okay. And so throughout my 3 years in Africa, I became very unpolitically correct, and I'm not sensitive anymore at all, because I don't think it's hurting anyone just to sort of tell the truth or just call it what it is. And so in my book, I just call it what it is, and it just is honest and it's genuine. And if people want to say that it's not politically correct, I'm going to tell them they should go and spend a couple of years on the ground in Africa and then ask the Africans if they think it's unpolitically correct. And I'm pretty sure they're going to tell you that no, it's not. It's just, this is just the reality. Some people have white skin and some people have black skin.
Well, not only that, but that I find that Africans are the most quick to agree with most of my criticisms of their continent and of their countries. And whenever I would bring up these issues, that any kind of criticisms I have had of their countries, they would be like, yeah, that's right. And it's the intellectuals that come out of Africa, maybe the guys who go to Harvard or whatever. And then there's the white people, the people who, and some of them are working for NGOs and or who have never even been to Africa for that matter, who are very protective of the way we characterize Africa.
Yep.
And any kind of derogatory statements must be silenced.
Right.
And what are some of the controversial opinions that you have about the continent, or things that the politically correct crowd would be bristling over?
There's a bunch, but first and foremost, I don't really think foreign aid is helping. I think actually it does a lot of harm for the most part. I'm sure some of it is helpful, and I'm sure, well directed and well looked after, but that's less than 5% of the overall. So I think, a lot of people would be annoyed to hear that.
Right. And they certainly are, although Dambisa Moyo wrote that book, Dead Aid, and she got quite a following. And then there's also The White Man's Burden, written by, I forgot his name, that man, who also criticized aid. Bill Gates, though, says that we need to distinguish between aid that either private organizations are doing that are helping like healthcare stuff, which is what the Gates Foundation is doing, versus government aid, which are helping to, let's say, prop up leaders or buy tanks or that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I don't know if you see that as being a distinction or all aid is more or less anathema.
Oh, no, I think, there's definitely a distinction and there's definitely a lot of nuances. But I think the bulk majority of money that's spent on aid is just about like getting good coverage in the press. You know, hey, look what we did. Give us a gold star. Let us, print a nice, colourful brochure so we can get more money and then move on. It isn't. They're not actually trying to help. They're just trying to like give themselves props or be able to print a colour brochure. So I think that's the biggest distinction I make. Do these people actually care about helping people on the ground? Or do they just care about like increasing their budget for next year and bringing in even more money next year?
I'm going to need to talk with you again after I read your book because I'm fascinated. I just can't wait to read it. I will support you on your Kickstarter.
Thank you.
And get you a book sale there. And I hope the people who are listening to this will also support you on your Kickstarter. I think it's great what you're doing. I know it's very difficult and extremely unprofitable.
This is not a money, like I'm not getting rich, that's for sure.
No, not at all. People will say like, your Kickstarter raised $20,000. I'm like, yeah. And I spent 19.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. And I have to pay income tax on that.
Exactly.
Like, oh, great.
So, it's a very tough thing that what you're doing. And it's a very, financially, it's not lucrative at all. And so I know you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, or at least the sense of adventure, and not for any kind of profit motive. And I think it's great. Now, what is your? So I want to read the book, and then after I read it, I would love to interview you about certain passages and ideas about it.
Now I better go back and make sure they're all up to snuff.
That's all right. And then once we do, there'll be a few months down the line, or whenever you have your next promotion or you're launching another trip, which brings to my next question, which is, what is your? People like you like to they can't just rest on their laurels. They have to go off and, what is a laurel, by the way? When people say I rest on your laurels.
I've always wondered if it's something to do with like the back of your butt, like, I don't know, behind your quads.
Laurel? I got to Google that. Laurel. What is a laurel?
We should Google that.
Anyway, exactly. We should, but we're too busy talking to each other. So let's see. What is your next trip, Dan Grec?
I have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of dreams. I don't have a lot of money, which is a problem. Right now, I'm going to launch
Kickstarter will help you with that, dude. You're going to make thousands. You're going to be rich with Kickstarter.
Yeah, I'll be able to buy like 10 tanks of gas for the Jeep. It'll be great. I'm doing a cross-Canada speaking tour this summer, 2020.
Oh, sorry. Can I interrupt you? Sorry, you said you have no money. Do you have an estimate of roughly how much money it cost you to travel to Africa for, did you say 3 years, 35 countries?
Yeah. What I don't like to say the whole number because people think it's really daunting. So what I always say, I'm like an
$80,000.
No less than that.
Okay.
So I'm like an overlanding nerd, and I talk to lots of overlanders on the road, and how much are you spending, and this and that, and pretty much everyone driving around the world spends between $1,500 and $2,500 per month for absolutely everything, all lodging, all gas, all visas, all camping, everything.
Right, and but you might have to pay for the car itself.
Yeah, on top of that would be the car itself.
The fixed costs.
Right. So, and it's your choice whether you go on the low end of that. Like when I drove Alaska to Argentina, I spent about $1,200 a month for everything because I cooked all my own food and I camped wild a lot, and I didn't do expensive activities. In Africa, if you wanted to eat at restaurants and drink a bottle of wine every night, you could easily spend $3,000 a month. It wouldn't even be hard. So it's the individual's choice. I spent about $1,600 to $1,700 a month for everything.
Got it.
Which interestingly, I always say, I was spending about $1,200 a month just to go to work every day.
Yeah.
When I had a job in a city in Canada, car insurance, health insurance, rent, food.
Of course.
Yeah. So it kind
which
of
once again, it
costs the same amount of money to drive around the world as it does to just stay home and go to work.
It's one of the great secrets that nomads have, and some people just haven't learned it yet.
That's right.
And I commend you for doing that. Okay, so now you need to go back into money-saving mode, I suppose.
Yes, that's right.
And that's your goal right now. You're going to go back and do the same desk job that you had before?
I'm currently trying hard to avoid it. My goal is not. So I'm kicking off a speaking tour across Canada where I'll tell stories, show photos and videos about.
But that doesn't
about my
pay,
time in
dude.
Africa.
Usually.
Well, I'm hoping that it might.
What? Very little. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but it's hard to get people to pay you, let's say, more than $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per speech.
Well, that's a lot. I don't need that much.
Okay, I understand, but anyway, the point is that even if you get 1,000, Canada's a big little country. It's like big little country. It's a big country, and it just driving across, you can just spend hundreds of dollars just going from one town to the other, just in fuel prices.
It's true.
So if you're only charging $1,000 per speech, you could be spending hundreds of dollars just getting to the next town to do the next speech.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is certainly an interesting problem, and I don't actually know how it's going to go yet. I'm kind of I wish you the best.
I
want to try it to see if it works, because then I'll know. In 5 years, I'll look back and I'll say, I'm really glad I tried that, even if it didn't work.
Right. But then your plan B is if then you would then go back to sell your soul to the devil and that company.
That's right.
I hope they're not listening.
Yeah, that's plan B, and it's plan Z, but there aren't any in between, I guess.
And that's another thing that a lot of people, I think, don't realize, that getting a job in the healthy economies that the high-income countries generally have is surprisingly easy.
It's really easy. Yep.
Right. And so we have this notion that if I give up my job, I'm never going to get another job ever again.
Exactly.
This is going to be the last job I'm ever going to be hired for. And so I can't leave it because when I come back, I'll be jobless forever.
Yep. And that's like terrifying, because if you're jobless, then you're homeless, then you're destitute.
Right.
Yeah.
And what nomads often teach the world is that no, you can find a job quite easily, especially, of course, if you're not hyper picky on the level of income that you need, or you don't have some obscure job. Like if your talent is to be a teacher of anthropology,
right?
There's not too many anthropology positions in universities open every year,
right?
And it's probably a competitive, I imagine. And so then the anthropology professor is like, well, if I leave this post, who knows when I'm going to get another one, and so I'll have to, do a menial job.
Yep.
That pays far less. And so I understand that those people who have very special jobs, but a lot of people don't have such unique skill sets.
That's right.
And
I've always thought one of the great things is, because I never climbed the ranks at work, I'm not a specialist like a professor of anthropology. I'm just a bland old teacher. So I can literally go anywhere in the entire world almost and just get a job teaching English. And there's thousands of them all over the world. And I'm willing to do that. And I'll make less money than a professor of anthropology, but it's easy to get a job.
Right. Dan, I could talk to you for many more hours.
Yes, me too.
But unfortunately, our listeners have a time limit. I'm sure some of them actually have real lives, unlike you and me.
I don't know why they would do that. It seems crazy to me.
We're so interesting. But anyway, thank you so much for all your time. We've talked for about an hour and a half, and it's been fascinating. And I would love to. I'm going to order your book.
Awesome.
Once again, remind people, go to The Road Chose Me.
The Road Chose Me, yeah. And that's across Instagram, YouTube, and then the website, or just on Kickstarter, they can just search for The Road Chose Me.
Right. And then go ahead and order it. And then if you listen to this podcast after March 22nd, is that?
March 14th.
March 14th, 2020, if it listened to it afterwards, the book will be available on Amazon and other places.
It will, that's right. Yep. Yeah. And the first one is already on Amazon.
Right. And so, the first book. And then you can still get the color book, the picture book and all these other things.
That's right.
And so, last thing I'll leave the listeners, if you're on the fence about supporting Dan's project or not, do I really want to read his book? I've already heard the whole podcast. I kind of know a lot of the story. Or if you're on the fence, or is his photos book really good? Does he know how to take photos? If you're on the fence about that, buy the fucking book. Help the dude out, because, it's for a good cause. He's poured his heart out. So I would just say, if you're on the fence about whether you should support the project or not, if you don't like the book after you read it, then give it away to somebody else. Inspire somebody else and say, hey, read this book. You might like it if you like to travel. And it's not going to go to waste. Don't throw it in the garbage. Share it with some other people. So that's my advice. Dan, you're awesome. I love you. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Francis. That was fun. See ya.
Yeah. And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember ftapon. That's my first initial and my last name. ftapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember ftapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.